up, my dudes? What's happening, man? This is Trent, and today we're going to be covering a little bit of some comic book style coloring and how to transition from your comic book style coloring into a little bit more of a painterly look. And what we're looking at here is a drawing done by Stephen Crow from Crow's Toons. And no doubt it looks awesome, but he asked me, hey, how can I make my comic book art style look a little bit more painterly? So that's what we're going to be doing today. So everybody should already know this, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we've got ourselves a comic book style drawing here. So first of all, you would sketch things out with super rough kind of line work like this, doodles, thumbnails, and then you would trace over that to get some nice clean line work out of it. And that's like your line art layer. And then of course you do color flats. And if you notice, this is just completely flat. And because your line art is on a layer above it, if it's just labeled here as lines, you could just, you could paint whatever you want underneath it. As we can see here, if we go to the flats layer and we paint underneath it, it preserves the line work, but it still fills in the nice solid flat colors. Stephen here has gone in and done a blur layer, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you want to do a traditional comic book style coloring system, something like this should do you fine. But we're not looking to do that. We're looking to punch it up a notch and transition from doing comic book style coloring to a little bit more of a painterly style, like what you'd see in something like a Hearthstone. And first and foremost, I'm going to do this the way that I would do it. So, you know, you're going to have people who are going to go, oh, that's wrong. You should have kept that. Or, oh, no, I really like that look. And that's fine. Art's subjective. You do it your way. But I'm going to do this the way I would do it. First of all, get rid of your blur. Don't ever do that. It's not working. Okay. Second thing, I'm going to take this line layer that's a normal layer, and I'm going to add some color to that. So I'm going to hit Command U. I'm going to lighten it. I'm going to colorize it. And I'm going to make it like a red or a brown. Just give it like a warm value, something like this. And, you know, the nice thing about this is if you select that line work using Command and then click on the thumbnail on your layer stack, then you hit Command H, you can hide it. And then you can actually like colorize your lines. This is one way to get a pretty nice animated look, which some people like, some people don't. Now, if you are still in the space where you're like, oh no, I really like comics and I really like black line art, you know, maybe even like Mignola type of stuff. I get it. Like I like that some of that stuff too, but I do not like the sort of like black line animated look. It doesn't work well for my taste. Okay, you might have different taste. I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't like that. It's just the way that I do things. So see here where you've got like the line work, it's actually being painted. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more so you can see it. And we're going to time lapse here a little bit. And you can see that I'm really just grabbing a darker color for the edges. So if it's skin, it's going to have a darker skin tone. And if it's the hair that's white, it's going to have like a darker blue, but it's still desaturated. If it's metal, it's going to be like a darker gray. Okay, now we want to get a little bit more painterly with this, and that's going to start from having a little bit of lighting in here. You know, what we're looking at is basically color flats. There's no lighting here at all. So we're going to need to add some depth. We're going to need to like add a little bit of shadow. And one way that you could do this, I mean, I don't personally do this very much. I don't care much for this method, but I know they do this with a lot of the Overwatch stuff where they just do all of their shadows on one big layer using a big airbrush, right? So you do something like this, and in fact, just do it all. You could just do it all in one flat color, and then what you're going to do anyway is like set this to multiply, and then maybe set the opacity down to like 28%, right? So now anything that we paint with this color that's in here is going to look like that shadow under his chin. And you can do that with the airbrush and the selection tool, or you could just use a regular old brush and just go in and paint in where the shadows would be. In this case, I'm just kind of picking a general top-down lighting situation. It's not really dramatic. It's not like dark black shadows. It really doesn't matter what brush you use for this. You could do this entirely with airbrush if you want softer shadow edges, but if you want a more animated look, you're going to use something more of like a hard edge, or like I said, just use the selection tool and then use the airbrush to kind of like turn forms and curve things around. You're going to have you know, a pretty decent understanding of, you know, how to cast shadows and calculate out shadows with something like this. But for the most part, I mean, it sticks to a pretty structured process. Again, I'm still just on a shadows layer. that's in between your color flats and your line art. So the nice thing about having all of your shadows on one layer, as we can see if I move it, the nice thing about that is that if I wanted to add, like say, a little bit more cool color to my shadows, I could literally hit color balance and add a little bit more blue to that, or I could just hit Command U and then change the color, even increase the saturation. So you can see how adding a little bit more warm color or cool color, generally speaking, shadows are cool colors. But this gets you some nice color blending going on. In this case, I usually go with I'd say like a cool color. And here's where it gets pretty darn cool. Because we're on our own layer, they're just the shadow layer, you can set it to the eraser tool here and then set that to a airbrush. You're going to erase out. So you've got this like color in your shadows. It's like a nice cool color in your shadows. You can soften all of your shadow transitions. So if you have something where the shadow would be cast really hard right under the nose, but then it kind of fades off because it's a smoother surface, you can see here how it almost looks like there's a little bit more bounce light coming into the shadows almost. Then of course the next thing would be you want your highlights layer. So we'll just call this one the highlights. It's a very structured, very clean kind of a system for keeping your layers organized, at least for the most part, until I get all nutty and just start painting. But for the most part, yeah, you've got your highlights, your shadows, and then you got your color flats, and above all of that, you got your line art. And so like these are just for your specular, mostly. Some like more standout kind of highlights, like the reflections you'd see in the eyes or on the cheeks and things like that. And if you want to kind of pop out any edges or anything like that, this is the opportunity to do that. And the highlights layer could pretty much include anything that stands out as like a rim light or a specular light or a reflective light, anything like that. Now this is all a very cartoony art style and wouldn't really work well for concept art or illustration for games, for instance. So if you want to get a lot more into rendering, you're going to have to bypass a lot of this clustering and do actual fibers and like learn to paint like some more different types of materials. I did a series here on my YouTube channel that basically breaks down how to do material studies. So check out some of my other videos on that topic if you're looking to get a little bit more advanced with this. As I said before a million times, you got to cater your rendering style to whatever it is that the game style is in. In this case, we're kind of doing something that is a cartoonier kind of a style. I think the Twilight Monk universe is kind of cartoony, but it does have a little bit more grit than something that you might see on like a Saturday morning cartoon, for instance. It's not as clean or crisp as what we had started out with. Now, once you've decided on the direction of light, like in this case, the direction of the light is coming from the top, so the underside of everything is going to have shadow. You can't just change that up randomly throughout your piece. You have to be somewhat consistent with your lighting. If you're kind of new to lighting your characters like this, then I would stick with just one kind of a light source and try to just do like a top-down lighting like what you're seeing me do in this drawing. Everybody always makes the mistake of jumping in and going, well, I want to have like a red light and like a blue light coming from behind him, and then I want to have like, all these blown out saturated lights coming from the side and all that fun stuff. But don't jump ahead of yourself, man. What you can do, though, if you want to add a little bit more depth to something, is add a little bit of a rim light, and that's really just kind of like that bounced material, like that canvas color would be bouncing onto just the edge, but you got to make sure you have a good strong shadow there so that you get a good contrast there. Like something like a rim light usually works better if you have a darker colored background. So I'll show you what I mean. If I change this to like a dark gray, you can see how that rim light suddenly pops out a lot more. But then, of course, the problem becomes that you're not going to be bouncing off that dark gray onto the side of his face. So you probably want to have an object. What this implies is that there is a light that is off, kind of distant from him. And so like the dark area is butting up against his flesh tones. And then we've got some reflective surface from off in the distance. It's kind of a hard light, almost kind of behind him. Here you can see how I'm backing up that rim light with a little bit of the same rim light on the side of his nose so that it looks like it's got depth, it looks like it's turning, it's got rounded form to it. I want to get those colors a little bit more rich, so I'm going to go in and add a adjustment layer. It's going to be a levels layer, and I'm just going to darken it a little bit so that all of our values get just a little bit darker. And that's going to give me a little bit more of a playground here to work with, because the colors are going to be a little bit too rich though. So I'm going to have to go in and create a saturation layer, adjustment layer on top of that to lower the saturation on everything as well. Another nice little touch that I like to do to unify some of my colors is I'll create a color balance adjustment layer over the top of everything. And if I just want to like kind of add a little bit more blue to everything, for instance, it helps to unify all of your colors a little bit and create a little bit more color harmony. But the problem with everything in your image having color harmony is then nothing stands out. So you're going to later want to go in and add some like warm lights to really make certain areas pop out. Whatever you want, for instance, to be the focal point. And another thing you can do here, once you've got all your colors in place, I color dab over the place once I get to this point. And I'll use the airbrush tool to just soften up a lot of those edges and transitions. And then I'll go in with just my standard square brush and do a little bit of like edging. And this is kind of like sculpting a little bit, just softening some areas and then sharpening up the contrast and edges of some other areas. That pinch, that value change of smooth surfaces versus hard edges is really good. What's going to kind of create a sense of depth and a sense of different types of materials in your image. I'm also going in and adding some hair fibers to make his hair feel a little bit more like they're tufts. The fibers in those kind of lines are going to really help to imply that it's not the same material as his flesh. That's in a sense using a blend of color and contour. Make sure that if you have rim light or something like that, it's consistent across the entire image. So you don't want to have like, rim light on one area, but then that light isn't affecting another object that's on the same body or in the same distance or depth from that light. His earrings are metal, so they have a little bit more reflectivity to it. So you're going to see that hair color bouncing off of the metal, right? It's like almost like a mirror. I mean, for me, this part's really a fun playground for me. Getting into the rendering is really just about looking at how reflective is the surface, what kind of material and contours do I want to put in there, and where's the light coming from, and how's that going to cast a shadow onto this type of surface, and is this type of surface also going to be affected by any other lights? And that just gets to be like a fun little playground for me. All right, now for the hot trick that nobody ever talks about. I'm going to tell you about a secret weapon I call color dodge, okay? I know, right? Like, why does nobody talk about this? Create a layer, you set it to color dodge, and then you lay down some warm colors, and whoa, it's like magic, man. But you know what, dudes? That's not all. Check this out. I got the color burn too. Bam! This is a different layer type. I usually just use color burn in my shadows, and sometimes it gets a little too dark, so you gotta like back off that layer. And then the final step on a different layer on top of all that, you can color grab and just continue to render out on it. I mean, some people will sit there and just render on these things for hours. You can also get into the mixer brush and adding some texture materials and fancy things like that if you really want to level it up beyond that. This is sort of just a beginner to intermediate kind of a overview of a couple of techniques that you can do to get your comic book looking work a little bit more painterly. I sent this video back to Stephen Crow and the same exact information that you just got, and he was able to take his original that you see on the left here, and then he punched it up with some more rendering like you see on the right here. And man, I think it's a heck of an improvement. I'm patting myself on the back here. I hope that this video helped you as well with transitioning some of your comic book style work into a little bit more painterly work. There's a lot more to do, but this is a nice first step, I'd say. If you want to show off your progress to me, please do not hesitate to tag me over on Twitter. I'd love to see it. And don't forget to subscribe. And dudes, until next time, I'll catch y'all on the Bon. And ciao, baby. Oh, yeah.